everyone. Welcome to Blackbird Writers Award-winning podcast. I want to welcome our author, Sharon Michalove. Sharon grew up in suburban Chicago. She received 4 degrees from the University of Illinois and spent most of her career at the university, eventually earning a PhD, working in departmental administration, publishing, and libraries. Her specialties are 15th and 16th century European history, polar exploration, and food history, which is one of my favorites here. She may be one of the few people in America to never live outside her home state. Sharon is kind enough to join us today to talk about both her experiences as an author and her newest book, Under the Kissing Bough, which explores the world of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, while also putting, actually, I would very much say so, a fresh spin on both Jane Austen and the challenges that women faced in the 18th century. So thanks for joining us. Excited to talk to you about your work. Always a fan. Um, and I've read a lot of Sharon's work and enjoy it a great deal.
Thank
Um,
you.
we're going to hit on some of my favorite things about her work, her use of romance and her discussion of food, and just her ability to build tension, I think, is something I really need to kind of sing your praises about. Okay, so since you largely write romantic suspense and mystery, there aren't like the heart-thumping beats that often go in thriller and even some mystery, but you still do an excellent job maintaining suspense as each love interest unfolds, and I really admire that. And I found this particularly true of At the Ready. So is creating suspense a motivator for you, and do you have any tricks that you want to share with other authors?
So this is an interesting point, and At the Ready is a good example. I actually don't have an easy time with building suspense in, and when I first started writing, I kept getting criticized that there wasn't enough suspense, which was interesting for me because I'd never written anything like that before. When I got to At the Ready, which is the third book in the Global Security Unlimited series, I wrote a big scene where the villain throws a grenade into the heroine's house. It sets the couch on fire, which sets the living room on fire. So I wrote the scene. It was about 1,000 words, and I sent it off to my alpha reader, who always has lots of criticism for me, and she goes, nobody seems to get upset about this. I'm like, oh. She goes, why isn't the mother crying? Why isn't somebody saying, oh, I've lived in this house for 35 years? And
Yeah.
so I thought to myself, oh yeah, I have no emotion in this scene. So, I built up the suspense a little bit, but really, so I rewrote the scene. It was over 1,500 words by the time I was done, and it had a lot more suspense. It had a lot of emotion in it, and it worked out a whole lot better. And that's one of the things I find with my books is that usually I layer that stuff in later because somehow I'm not I always thought I was a really emotional person, but evidently I'm not that emotional. So it doesn't cross my mind that, oh yeah, if somebody firebombed my house, I'd be really upset.
Yeah, it becomes kind of, I feel like the emotional response in the character is kind of a call and response. Like, here's the thing that happens, and then we get to internalize it from their response to it. Do you feel more connected to your characters or more you give your characters energy when you give them a little more of an emotional response?
I feel like that everything comes together a lot better.
Yeah.
But I guess I'm just absent-minded about that when I write my first draft. It's like, oh, uh,
Well, then
I
you just
need
get
I
to
need to
add it
do
later.
this. But now because I've written enough more, I've written that was my actually my fourth book because my third book wasn't in that. And but I've written a bunch of short stories and all kinds of things since then. And one of the things that I tend to have to do is I put that in now as I go along. I seem to be better at doing that, but I'm still not one of those authors who writes a really sad scene and then cries.
Yeah.
I'm not that author, but
I
I
don't
can
think
do
every
a
reader
lot
knows
more
that.
now that
Yeah.
kind of ups the tension. But in Under the Kissing Bough, I have a fight near the end, and I had it be this sword fight, which seems like it would be a logical thing for the Regency period, right? And one of the two people is a soldier and all that kind of stuff. And one of the people who read it specializes in Regency fiction, and she said, "Oh, well, most men weren't wearing swords by then. It wasn't like part of the dress." And he's not in his uniform. So, and he didn't have a sword, but the other guy suddenly had a sword. She goes, either he's got to have it earlier in the book or you can't do this. And I thought, I wrote this in a blacksmith shop. The scene takes place in a blacksmith shop. So why aren't they swinging at each other with iron bars and using shovels and
Good
all that
solid.
kind of thing? Why would they have a sword fight? Just because that's the logical thing to think is a sword fight. So I rewrote that scene. It's a whole lot better. It's not really any longer than it was before, but it makes a lot more sense that the one guy he finds this iron bar on the floor and then swings it at the other guy's head and that kind of thing. And then there's also this cooling trough, because if you've ever seen a blacksmith shop on TV or whatever, they heat up the iron and they pound on the iron and then they dump it into cold water. So at the end of that, he pushes him into the trough of cold water.
Oh, I like that.
So
I feel like sometimes you can be writing a scene that sounds like not a happy accident, but like a natural, you really kind of being in the space and experiencing it as the author. Sometimes the solutions just present themselves, which I think can be nice.
yeah, and that usually happens to me in the revision stage.
Yeah.
So, a lot of authors will tell you that when they revise, what they do is they start cutting things out. I usually add words. So when I finished this and gave it to my critique group, as Amanda knows, it was about 30,000 words long, and now it's 50.
So yeah, you're the writer that likes to flesh it out. It's going to get all the nuts and bolts and the tent pole plot points in there and then flesh it out rather than cutting away stuff later.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
And I
which
like developing character, but it took me a while to get to a point where I was doing a lot of description, even though, one of my favorite authors is Charles Dickens, and there's always
oh my goodness.
long sentences and lots of description and all that kind of thing. So that's something else I've had to learn to layer in because I'd have early readers say, I can't really visualize what this room looks like. And because I started out writing romantic suspense, where half of the plot has to be romance, and romance writers spend a lot of time telling you what their characters look like and what they're wearing and what their rooms look like and all that kind of thing. I could do that with food right away, but I wasn't doing it with other things.
I want to get there actually because sensory details are, I you fill them in later, but they are there. And I feel like sensory details, of course, draw us in so much more as a reader. And I think that, you use food, you pay a great deal of attention to food, and it pairs well with romance because you have that kind of sensuality with it, even when there's no intimacy in the scene. And I like that a lot. And so, how does food draw your characters together? Like, how do you feel like that brings them together? And does it motivate you as a writer and as a human in the world?
Well, for one thing, I'm interested in food and I'm interested in the history of food, and I used to be very interested in cooking. And I used to do a lot of events and that kind of thing. And I like to go out to eat. And I live in a great city for going out to eat. Chicago is wonderful for that. But and I was married to somebody who had no interest in food whatsoever, so I had to find some other ways to satisfy my craving for really interesting foods. But I write about older characters. So when you're writing about young people, they're going out to dances, they're doing all these things. And my characters are, I mean, they could still be doing that. They're in their 40s, and I'm not even in my 40s anymore. But those aren't the kinds of things that I did. I didn't go out to bars. I didn't, do sporting events and all those kinds of things. So I have to have some place for my characters to go. And a lot of times, where my characters go is to a restaurant, or they go to a cafe. Or in my first two books, my heroine is an author, so she goes to this great little cafe every day and she writes there. And so I can have scenes there, and I can have people drop in and stuff like that. So, and food just naturally goes along with it. But also, she's a very she's a very clumsy person, so she's always dropping things and having accidents with food and that kind of stuff. So it adds a little bit of humor and some other
Yeah.
kinds of things. And there's a lot of Chicago restaurants in the first couple of books, and then I can show off what I know about places to eat in Paris and places to eat in London and all that kind of thing because it's just fun for me
Yeah, can I
to
actually
do
jump
that.
to a different question I had about that? Because sometimes you don't, in the strictest sense, you don't write travel narratives. You're not writing travel fiction, but I do feel like I've been someplace when I read your work. I feel like I've experienced the city, the sights, the sounds, and
Mhm.
often the food, because that is something that you have a penchant for. So, is that, do you write as you travel, or is it something you bring back with you that kind of gives you a different cultural lens to experience your own life and characters?
Well, there's a couple of different things that have happened. So when I first started writing the novels, I'd traveled a lot already. And so, like, the first book mostly takes place in Chicago, but the second book goes from Chicago to London to the Scottish Highlands to Paris. And it was supposed to go on to Istanbul, and my editor said to me, "No, no, it's too long, and you don't need that. Finish up the book has to end in Paris." So I used a lot of the experiences that I'd had in traveling, and then I wrote my Michigan book. It takes place in northern Michigan, which is not the Upper Peninsula. It is the upper part of the lower lower part of Michigan. Um, and the area I wrote about, I had never been to. And there wasn't any way that I was going to be going there because I don't own a car and I don't like to travel alone. And it would have been difficult for me to get up in that area. And I just did a ton of research on it. I looked at, I can't tell you how many pictures, how many maps, how many, finding houses that would work and all that kind of thing. And then creating this smaller version of the town that I based it on. And I thought, well, and I was looking up Michigan beers and what kinds of expressions that they used that we don't use, say, in Illinois, and there's a few. And what did they sound like? Well, it turns out they sound a lot like people from Chicago, so I didn't have to worry about that. Because I had a guy who came from Detroit, and I'm like, well, what do Detroit people sound like? I have some cousins there, but I mean, they don't really sound any different from us. And essentially, all the research said, oh, people from Detroit sound just like people from Chicago. Okay, well that works. So then I went to BoucherCon and I was on a panel, and this guy came up to me before the panel started, and he had read one book by every author on the panel because a friend of his was the moderator. Oh, well, that's interesting. So he got to me last, and he said, "So I looked you up on Amazon, and I decided to get Dead in the Alley because it was the first one that came up." I said, "Oh, okay. What'd you think?" He said, "So when did you move from Michigan to Illinois?" And I said, I've never lived in Michigan. And he said, well, you could have fooled me. I'm from Ann Arbor originally, which is right outside Detroit. He said, it sounded very Michigan to me. And I thought, well, okay, I guess I did kind of well with that. And then two people that I know read the book, and I didn't know that either of them was from Traverse City. And both of them said, I read the book. It's Traverse City, isn't it? Which is the town I based it on. And I thought, well, I still would like to go there, but I guess I did a pretty good job in just the research. But I
Yeah,
think my history background is part of what my history and library backgrounds are kind of what helped me do that because I'm really, really good at doing research.
yeah, I think that there, is often much debate about write what you know, and you need to be from an area or have some familiarity. And I think that it sounds like one of the things we're talking about here is that as long as you put the research in and you do the work, then it's, you can bring something to life without having been there.
Yeah, yeah, and I wanted to feel what it was like to be there. And
Yeah,
I'd been to,
yeah,
it's not like I hadn't been to Michigan, but I hadn't been to the Traverse City area. I mean, I
sure.
mostly was in southern Michigan. And when I was in northern Michigan, I was in Petoskey, which is, so Traverse City is as far west as you can go because it's right on Lake Michigan. Um, and then it's got a river in it. So it's kind of interesting because it's on Lake Michigan and it has a river, kind of like Chicago, but it's only 15,000 people. Um, Petoskey's up farther north. So it's up kind of at the top of northern Michigan. just before you go over to get to like uh why can't I think of the name of it? The island, Mackinac Island.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so it's just before you get there. So I'd been up there, but I'd never been through the Traverse City area. And so I had kind of a feel for what it might be like, but I'm looking up what kind of music, what kind of radio stations do they have, all these different kinds of
Yeah,
things. And then when I wrote at the Ready, I had stupidly created my character 2 books before to be from Vancouver, and I needed to set a whole portion of the book in Vancouver, and I had never been to Vancouver. I know a bunch of people who live in Vancouver, so that helped. And I asked for, some advice about, what kinds of things would people notice there, and what would be a good area of the city for this woman to live in. And then I ignored them and used a different area altogether because it had, this is so stupid, because it had bungalows, right? So it had bungalows a long time ago and adopted them from the Pacific coast because bungalows in North America really started in California and up the coast up to the Northwest. Um, and Chicago is known for its bungalows. And my female character is from Chicago. And she's very excited when she sees this house because she goes, "Oh, bungalows, just like we have at home." It's kind of like, okay. And so that turned out to be really good. And I learned a lot about Vancouver. And then one of my friends who lives in the Vancouver area read the book and she said, "Oh yeah, it's just right." And he's definitely French Canadian. I grew up in Quebec, and he sounds just right for that. And there's a lot of French Canadians who don't live in Quebec.
yeah.
Um,
It's nice to get that endorsement though of someone who actually lives
oh
there.
yeah, no, it was really good. So part of it too is finding people who can kind of help you out.
For sure.
And that's kind of a major thing, and that's why I consulted with my friend who does a lot more research on the Regency because the Regency is not the 15th century.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, can we segue to that for a second? I
sure.
I, I kind of want to talk about your female characters. So even though you have 15th and 16th century expertise, you chose to
Mhm.
stretch a little bit and do a response to Jane Austen using her characters, and talk about 18th century women and sort of the very real problems they faced with courtship and marriage. And I think a lot of your characters are ambitious, strong women. Um, and even I would say in the kissing bow to under the kissing bow, you also have a character who, even though she has to kind of she's on the tide of things that are controlling her life, she still has inner strength. So yeah, so my question is twofold. How did you feel about writing an 18th century character? And then also, what's your motivation with writing ambitious women or what some people might say difficult women?
Mhm. Um, so I got sucked into the Regency because I agreed to write short stories for 2 Regency anthologies that were connected to Jane Austen. And then I ended up doing another 2 stories for 2 other uh, anthologies that were in that period. And I decided to do them because they came up as opportunities, and I thought, oh, I know something about this. That would be kind of fun. And most people didn't take it as seriously as I did. Some of them had never even read Jane Austen, some of the other authors. They just knew the TV adaptations and that kind of thing, which are kind of accurate, kind of not accurate, and they just kind of, they were told that there were certain things they couldn't do, like, you can't have them have a telephone, but they could be a little looser in their language and things like that. But I don't do that. But I enjoyed writing those. And one of those stories needed to be longer. And when I started writing it, I finally said to them, I have this problem because the story needs to be longer, and I only have 7,000 words, so I can't actually get to the end of it. Would it be all right if I have it a happily for now instead of a happily ever after? Because otherwise, it's going to be too crammed in there at 7,000 words. This is my 50,000 word book. So they said, yeah, as long as there's a kiss at the end. And I'm like, how am I even going to do that? These people aren't supposed to be in a room alone. They're not supposed to be touching. But I made that work, and and I'm sure it happened at the time, so that was okay. I really enjoyed it, but I have a tendency to start out with my female characters being really kind of passive. And then I realized as I go along that they have to have more agency. They can't just kind of let somebody else rescue them, and they can't just kind of sit and whine and that kind of thing. And that came out a lot with Cress at the beginning. Actually, when I wrote Cress, who was my first heroine in my first romantic suspense, a big problem was that I made her very prickly, and I made her, really keep rebuffing this guy. And I so I had early readers who were like, why would he even stick with this? Does he keep coming back for more? And I realized over time that I could do more with her without making her quite so horrible. So part of it was
Felt
learning
very
that.
well. Yeah, I felt like
Yeah.
she was strong without being too.
Yeah, but at the beginning she was really abrasive, and she kept kind of really pushing him away. And it's kind of like, he's too nice and she's too mean, and that kind of thing. So it was partially just a learning process. But I mean, I've always worked, and I always wanted to be able to accomplish things. And I think that women should be able to do that. And I looked at the example of my mother, who, had me 10 months after she got married, and then she didn't work again for years and years and years. And she was only 20 years old when she had me. So, and then later on, she had to become a stronger person. She always let my dad take the lead over everything. She was the typical 50s housewife. Um, and so for her, I remember after I got married, and I said something about, well, I do the cooking and I do the grocery shopping, and Peter does the cleaning and he does the dishes and all that. And my mother looked at me and she said, "Oh, how did you get him to do that?" Because the only thing my dad ever did was wash the floors, because he was fanatic about the floors. So so it was kind of a learning thing for her to learn to be, to state her opinions and to do those kinds of things. When her father told her she couldn't go to the University of Illinois and she started at community college, and she didn't like the travel back and forth every day, two buses, several hours on the bus each way. She gave up on the idea of going to school. She didn't say, I'll find some other way to do this, because of the time she lived in. So I'm really interested in having characters who figure out how to make that work.
Yeah, I think
Um,
that you do that. I think that they evolve throughout the story and they do often grow stronger as the story progresses, which I think is something that's very relatable, and I like that. Can you say when The Kissing Bout is going to come out and where you want people to buy it?
I wish. It's going to come out before Christmas. It's a Christmas historical.
Oh,
I'm
sure.
guessing it'll come out late in the summer. Um, But and that's why I can't show you a cover either, because it's coming out through the new Romance Cafe group, and they will create a cover. Right now it's at the editor, and then I have to fix it, and then I have to send it to them. So it'll be on Amazon. So the ebook will be on Amazon, and I will ask them to create paperbacks. It'll come out. Normally, it comes out under them. For the anthologies, they just publish them. For the way this works, we publish it under their auspices, but I actually put it up under my own account. They do the formatting and the cover and all that kind of thing, and then they send it back to me, and then I put it up. But since I'll have paperbacks as well, I'll also put them up on Ingram Sparks, so that people will
Great.
be able to go to a bookstore and order it if they want a paperback edition, or they can order it through Amazon. But it also means that they can order it through Barnes and Noble, and Barnes and Noble can get it
Yeah.
for them too. But the ebooks will only be available on Amazon.
Well, everyone should definitely pick it up, even if you're not into historical or romantic suspense. I think that it has wide appeal and it's a very enjoyable book.
Thank you. And
And
I had a lot of fun writing it too. So
it's a great read.
I always think it helps when you're enjoying what you're working on.
Absolutely.
As much as authors frequently are like, oh, you know, this is so hard. There's a real sense of achievement when it's done, and you feel like, well, I don't know how good it is, but I've had all these other people read it, and they really liked it, and I
Yeah.
really appreciate my readers because my whole goal is to have people read my books and like my books. It's not to make huge amounts of money, but it is important to me to have
For
lots
the
of people
passion.
like them.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm always hoping for more reviews besides. So,
Well, thank you so much for taking the time today and talking to me about your books and about,
well,
I
thank
mean,
you.
and I know our Blackbird readers will love to pick it up.
And I'm sure when it comes out, it'll be on the Blackbird Readers uh, the Blackbird Writers Facebook and on Substack and all that kind of thing, so that people will know it's there. So if I don't know when it's coming out, look for it a little before Christmas. It'll still be there, and it's a perfect time to read it. It takes place at Christmas.
Yeah, absolutely.